the capacity to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. I also learned, more recently, yesterday in fact, that the UN General Assembly earlier this year agreed on a slightly more detailed definition, which we are legally bound to. It should be on a slide behind us, but I will read it. The ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, adapt to, or transform and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions through risk management. So I just want you to bear this in mind as we go through this session. Our planet and its populations face multiple threats. The abstract for this session focused on issues that are cross-border and global, and in this panel, we're going to do the same. I think it's easy to feel despondent when we look at some of the issues that we face as a society and as a population of this planet these days. But I'm hoping that today we can pull out some information that will make us feel a bit more optimistic. We have an eminent panel, and they're going to talk to us about work that is ongoing to improve resilience of our planet and its systems. Virginia Murray is going to talk about the 2015 declaration from this meeting in Budapest and what has happened since then in terms of disaster risk reduction. And Professor Hiyashi is going to continue to do this and give us some examples from his perspective. Paolo Artaxo-Neto is going to talk about mitigation of greenhouse gases and adaptation studies, and hopefully give us some hope in that arena. Peter Thompson, who has been in his job now for 6 weeks, I believe. Yep. So he's going to talk to us about the oceans, and I think some of you attended the dinner last night, so you probably feel that you've learned a little bit about the oceans. But Peter Thompson is going to focus us on what is ongoing and the next 3 years and the next 10 years to try and help this planetary ecosystem as a whole. And then Carthage Smith is going to talk about the resilience of science itself and whether science is in a position to deliver on these issues or whether we need to adapt and get our own house in order. So we've got lots to cover. And we're hoping to have lots of time for discussion and to bring you into the discussion too. So I'm going to be timing, and I'm going to be very strict with my timings as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Virginia Murray. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here, and such a privilege to be in Jordan to reflect on the issues about resilience. Julie, could I have my slides, please? So I've been trying to bring together a lot of the work that has been happening as the vice chair of the UNISDR Scientific and Technical Advisory Group to try and understand how we deliver UN landmark agreements. I now am particularly working mostly where I have been employed, which is in Public Health England, but with many partners across the world, including IRDR, the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the United Nations University, and of course the World Health Organization. But all of these and many more are partners in the UN Landmark Agreement. These agreements were obviously made by the UN member states themselves, so they're really critical because they own them, they have adopted them. And of course we've talked about many of them in this conference already. So if we could move to the next stage, Julie. The one that we all have talked about has been the Sustainable Development Goals. This has been critical, and it's happened really over 15 years to provide a global vision to end poverty and to engage and really include those who are the most marginalized in the world that we've talked about so much. But there's also the Climate Change Agreement that has been so critical, and how we try and engage with that. And it's wonderful that Syria has so recently joined that group too. But I wanted to also mention the one that I have been particularly passionate about, which is the fact that disasters really damage. and we have to find a way to reduce that. And this has been a much longer-term UN-leveled negotiations to try and reduce the impacts of disasters. And Japan has led the way on much of this with the Yokohama Agreement, the Hyogo Agreement, and now we have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. This framework is very simple. Relatively, it looks like this. It's quite thin, and yet it is action-packed with what can be delivered. So let's just have a look at what we're trying to do. We're trying to really bring disaster risk resilience, which is about building resilience and reduction. It's about capacity development for resilience. It's about awareness and understanding of risks, but knowing the data. So scientists are critical in how we deliver this. It's about working together and having trusted partnerships. It's about including everyone from a local, national, regional to a global perspective and making sure that scientists in all regions and at all levels are engaged to help the whole system to work, which is very important for you, Carthage, when you come to talk later. But the other parts is that resilience is absolutely in the main outcome that we expect to achieve, the main goal from the Sendai Framework. Thus, strengthen resilience. It covers everything from integrated, inclusive, economic, structural, legal, social, health, cultural, educational, environmental, technological, political, institutional measures to try and prevent these hazards having impacts. It's very simple in many ways. As I've mentioned, we have one global outcome, 17 guiding principles, 4 priorities for action, but for the first time in the disaster risk reduction domain, we have global targets and indicators. Reduce mortality, reduce the number affected, reduce the economic loss, protect infrastructure, make sure that we look after schools and hospitals, but also increase the understanding of what the disasters are in your country, your area. Increase our international cooperation, make sure that early warning works. So all of these are really important, and one of the means for implementation in the Sendai Framework is the call for expansion of thematic platforms of cooperation, such as global technology pools and global systems to share know-how, innovation and research, and ensure access to technology and information for disaster risk reduction. Now, this was very much driven to the wonderful Budapest World Science Forum that was held, and the declaration that came out in 2015 included an invaluable statement for us who were working in disaster risk reduction, for knowledge base for disaster risk reduction, and encouraged the fact that we should have a UN ISDR Science and Technology Conference to try and understand how we could implement and mobilize science to deliver the Sendai Framework. And I had the great privilege to be the chair of the organizing committee to deliver this, and there's much we can share from that. But moving on as we must to the future, every 2 years we have a global platform for disaster risk reduction where UN member states, UN family, and many of the local organizations all come together with the scientists, health professionals, and many others. We had this in Cancun, in Mexico, courtesy of the Mexican government in May this year. And in the chair's summary, from commitment to action, there's a really important statement. Further progress is necessary to bridge the gap between science and technology and policy making to ensure that strategies delivered and required by 2020 are sound, including that they anticipate emerging risk patterns. Really critical for us, because if we don't do this, our resilience will not work towards reducing the impacts for our interconnected world. Thank you.
Thank you, and on to Professor Hiyashi.
Good afternoon. It is my great honor to be here this afternoon. I would like to follow what the Virginia said about the Sendai Framework. And starting in 2016, we are in the process of implementing those declarations into practice. So I would like to show some of our progress we have done. And the Japanese government had a committee for science and technology and innovation And the resilience is a very important concept for that we just call CSTI. And then we believe that in order to promote disaster resilience, we have to have three components in a coordinated way. The first one is to improve the prediction. In other words, the much accurate risk assessment. Second element is like promoting a prevention in an old-fashioned ways, promoting a mitigation. And then the third element will be we have to prepare for the disaster. So we need effective response and recovery. So all these three elements has to go together and then improve with each other. That's our basic idea. And then let me go to introduce some of the progress we have made this year. This is the example of the, come on. Okay. Our seismographic observation network. 20 years ago, when the Kobe earthquake happened, we started deploy about 2,000 seismograph network to observe the earthquake, which may happen right next to us. And then, after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, we also felt it is important to have the observational network should be expanded into a seafloor. And then we have now a northern part of the Pacific Ocean and then the western part of Pacific Ocean have been monitored continuously by 200 seismograph networks. And this network was completed this year, and then we named them as a MOLAS. And then this will be a kind of very important investment for the future disaster risk reduction. For the prediction purpose, we now have long-term seismic risk assessment. As you can see that the Pacific Ocean side is very, very red. So we are anticipating the very devastating earthquake in 20 years or so. So for time being, we try to maximize our capability for mitigating disasters. By using that network, we are trying to prevent at least casualties as much as possible. This is supposed to be an animation. And I wanted to show that the epicenter was under the sea, and then the wave propagation moved concentrically, and then also the tsunami propagation do the same. And then by applying this new set of instruments, we could have faster earthquake early warning, as much as 30 seconds for ground motion and 20 minutes for tsunami attack. And then as for the preparedness, we need to have 5 tasks, come on, to complete before the effective response and recovery will be completed. And as a first step, we need to have a common operational picture among various organizations and agencies which involved with the response and recovery. And at the same time, we do need to care that those disaster impacted people, we shouldn't say victims, and nobody should be left behind in order to accomplish the recovery, so that we develop the life recovery support system. And then last year we had the big earthquake in Kumamoto region. It was a 7.3 magnitude earthquake, the first 7.3 magnitude after the Kobe event for over 20 years, and then end up with the devastating damage. But thanks to that system, now the 15 impacted jurisdictions work together to have this kind of big picture about what the damage was. And then that will be used as the basis for providing a damage certificate, and then also be the chance for creating life recovery ledger for those people impacted. And then all these efforts for prediction, prevention, and response and recovery will be integrated by the Information Service Network for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience. That's our current activity. I do hope this could be like a pioneering work for the entire world. We are more than happy to help in any way to disseminate this kind of cutting-edge science and technology for the reduction of disaster risk and then promoting resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to say, I've seen that animation, and I'm sure you'll be happy to show anyone who's interested. It works on the laptop, so do ask if you want to see it afterwards. Paolo.
Oh, hello, thank you very much. And I think I will bring you one of the critical issues of our area in terms of resilience. That is the climate change issue and also the environmental stress that is heating up over our planet. So basically, it's essential for humanity to increase the resilience on, first, our social system, socio-economic system, on our natural resources usage. We need to make a much more rational use of the natural resources that we have. And thirdly, the ecosystem services that are critical and becoming more and more critical, especially water, and then to the climate change. And science have an absolutely key role in the interconnected world, and especially the South-South relationship in terms of science is absolutely critical. Solutions for these 4 items that could work in Europe, United States, or Japan could not work in the South. So basically, we needed to build a bridge for South-South scientific collaboration that is absolutely essential in my point of view. And also, what you needed to do is to exchange experience on how to implement the Paris Agreement that is heating up quite quickly, actually, in terms of mitigation of emission. And even if the full Paris Agreement is implemented, we needed to adapt to climate change. So I saw very little talks here on this conference on adaptation, but this is critically important. So basically, this is recognized by all major scientific magazines as well as to The Economist, that we are entering already in the Anthropocene area. And the Anthropocene is basically characterized by huge changes in our ecosystems and huge change in the climate of our planet. For instance, this is the observed increase in temperature over the last 100 and something years. And you can see that in central Brazil and in the Middle East, the temperature already have increased in between 2 to 2.5 degrees. So the Paris target of average global 2 degrees include also the oceanic area that heats up much less than the terrestrial ecosystems. So actually we are already observing 2.5 increase in temperature over large areas of our planet. And this brings a huge stress into the socio-economic system. So basically, the central part here, you see that resilience is a critical ingredient in between the functioning of the natural system, the social system that sustain our society, the climate that provides the services for us, and so on. And the interconnection are extremely complex, non-linear, and we hardly understand the 10% of the interconnections between all these critical ingredients. And this is critical for the future of our planet. So basically, we have to decide which future we want. So basically, on the right part of this graph, you see that we have to take decisions if you want an extremely unstable, let's say, unfriendly climate in the next 30 to 50 years, or if you could have a climate that we could deal with. And that will depend on a series of decisions, not just on the Paris Agreement, but especially on cooperations between the different countries. And if you see in the upper part of this plot, these are the countries that have contributed to most of the greenhouse gas emissions, and on the lower part are the countries that will be mostly impacted by the climate change. You can see that one is the mirror of the other, so basically we can see that the south will be most affected by climate change from emissions mostly up to now from the northern hemisphere. So basically this enhances the opportunity and the urgent challenge of integration for South-South science. And there are critical issues related to climate change, that one of them is the production of food. The World Economic Forum just released this plot that shows how a 3 degrees warming world will impact the food production. You can see that Brazil, most of Africa, India, and most of the southern part of our planet will be severely impacted by climate change in terms of the capability to produce food to feed 7, right now, billion people to 10 billion people in just a few decades. Another important challenge is how to deal with increasing climate extremes that is happening everywhere, not just in the hurricanes in the tropical Atlantic, but in terms of floods in India, droughts in Brazil, and so on. So basically, we need good science to support the strategies for us on how to deal with the increase in terms of climate extremes. One last point I want to raise is the issue of urbanization. So basically, my city, for instance, São Paulo, has 22 million people. So every time that you have a flood, it affects a lot of people. So basically, how to deal with this issue, how to increase the resilience of urban areas is absolutely critical for us to deal with. And this is recognized by several of the Sustainable Development Goals that I just put here. Some of them were resilience, increasing the resilience of our society is absolutely critical for our survival. And then, just to finish, the role of science, economics, society, and governance is absolutely critical in this game. So science is the base, but as you can see here, you can see that it's not the only ingredient. The economics, the political issues, the social issues are becoming more and more important, especially establish a governance system that can drive us out of this ecosystem services and climate crisis. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. And so on to Peter Thompson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. If humanity is going to have resilience on this planet, the health of the ocean is absolutely essential. Think only of the fact that every second breath that you take is of oxygen that comes from the ocean. There are 3 take-home points that I would like to make to you this afternoon. Firstly, the ocean is in deep trouble, be it ocean acidification, or be it deoxygenization, be it ocean warming, be it declining fish stocks. You want me to close? Yeah. And the list goes on. That is the first point. We have a real problem, just as we have a real problem with climate change. So you have climate change, you also have ocean change. The second point that I want to make is that we have a plan to save the ocean. When I say we, I mean humanity. This is a plan that was put together by all governments of this world painstakingly over many years of negotiation at the United Nations. And I refer to the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been mentioned by Paolo and others on the panel this afternoon. One of those goals is SDG 14, the so-called Oceans Goal. I won't go through it. I've got it here on my lap, but there are 10 targets. And you can pull it down on the internet as I'm speaking to have a look at it. Have a look at that plan. If we implement that faithfully between now and 2030, we will indeed save life in the ocean. The third point that I want to make to you is, in terms of a take-home, is that science is absolutely fundamental to the achievement of SDG 14. Have a look at the 10 targets. You'll see that most of them rely on science to produce the facts and figures and allow us to do the analysis to implement those targets and reach those targets. In fact, one of the 10 targets is specifically on strengthening marine science and technology transfer and research. So, science is the bedrock of SDG 14. That's my third point. Just a little bit of backstory about those SDGs. They were passed in September 2015 in the United Nations by the General Assembly in its high-level week, when all the presidents and prime ministers of the world were assembled in September 2015 to adopt those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we're all bound by these goals. And I have learned nothing during my time at the United Nations which would persuade me otherwise than to tell you that humanity's place on this planet is in great jeopardy, and I say that as a grandfather of 3 granddaughters who I care about more than anything else. I learned nothing as president of UNDP, as president of the Seabed Authority, as president of the Group of 77 in China, as president of the General Assembly. I learned nothing which dissuaded me from the fact that we are, our generation, placing our future generations in great jeopardy on this planet by our current behavior on this planet. So these SDGs, taken with the Paris Climate Agreement, are, in my view, absolutely essential for our survival out of the 21st century. SDG 14, I think I've still got another couple of minutes. SDG 14 required a moment of truth in terms of once we got it into place, and believe me, that was not an easy thing to do. Particularly the big countries were against us bringing an ocean goal into the Sustainable Development Goals. But the small island developing countries and others gathered around, we did get that through. Having got it through, what was then required was a moment of honesty and accountability, and that was what the Ocean Conference was in June this year at the United Nations. Probably the tipping point in consciousness, global consciousness, about the trouble the ocean's in and the action that needs to be taken. 6,000 ocean experts from around the world came and attended that conference. It was inclusive of science and business and governments. From that conference, 1,400 voluntary commitments were made. And part of my remit as the Special Envoy for the Ocean is to make sure that those 1,400 voluntary commitments are being facilitated. And I'm setting in place programs. In fact, I'm going to New York later this month to launch 9 communities of action, which are open to anybody in the world who wants to be part of them. All that you have to do to get entry into those global into those communities of ocean action, make a voluntary commitment on the UN website. So in conclusion, I want to say that I'm leaving tonight to go to Bonn, to the COP. At 10:30 tomorrow, I'm speaking on the Ocean Climate Nexus. There's an important meeting on that subject, because you can't look at climate change without considering ocean change. And then secondly, I am speaking at lunchtime on the main initiative of the Fiji presidency of COP this year, which is introducing an ocean pathway to the IPCC process and to the future COPs. so that that ocean pathway will join the forests and the cities and the other pathways which already exist. So in conclusion, to you, the World Science Forum, I say we can't do this without you. We absolutely require science to engage in the process of implementing SDG 14, and I look forward to working with you all over the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And final speaker now, Carthage Smith.
So that's a good point of handover. So we've heard that humanity is in jeopardy. We've heard that the agendas already exist. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. We hear that science is fundamental to implementing these agendas. We have good examples where we have networking and collaboration. We have to tackle the technical and social issues together. Yet we also hear that there's a gap between science, technology, and policy making. And the question that I would like to address or start to address is our current science system or science systems really equipped and ready to address the challenges that we have in front of us? We've heard many declarations going back to Budapest of what needs to be done, but actually, are we doing it at the scale that it needs to be done? And if we are not, what does that mean in terms of policy for science? So we can start with science itself, and there's an argument that science is in crisis. So here I put up a definition of resilience in science. Resilience is one of those words that can be applied to lots of things, but it's basically about response to threats or outside pressures and hopefully coming through those as an even stronger system. And I think that's the situation that science is in. We have a multitude of changes around science, some of which could be interpreted as threats or challenges. And some of these we've heard about throughout this meeting. So we've had sessions on post-truth and alternative facts, issues around the focus of science, a particular focus on short-term economic returns and how does that fit with this longer-term SDG type agenda. Issues about science dealing with complexity and uncertainty, which is not what science traditionally and in its disciplines is used to doing. The challenges around big data. We heard how critical data is to building resilience, and yet in the session this morning we also heard some of the issues, the challenges around actually working with big data. And then all of this is in a science system where our academic structures have actually been incredibly resilient, some would say completely inflexible, and maybe they need to change a little bit. And when I say academic structures, I include our funding structures, the way we reward people, our career structures in science, the disciplinary structures, etc. So here's some of the areas where if science is to respond to these threats and be resilient and help society to be resilient and to respond to the SDGs, then here's some of the areas from a science policy perspective that science needs to address. So we need to address the integrity of science. We need to ensure academic freedom and autonomy. Utilitarian science is not what we need, but somehow we have to direct and encourage science in the areas where at the moment we need it most. That includes responding to global societal challenges. We've talked in the meeting in different sessions about the importance of building trust or the declining trust in science. A lot of this comes back to how do we actually review and assess science, and then of course attracting the next generation of science. And I'll just focus on three of those. This is a long agenda, and there's a lot could be said about all of those, but the three that are marked in red I think are particularly critical. So scientific integrity and post-truth. And one of the challenges here is that there also seem to be weekly stories coming out of science that actually can't be reproduced, or science that was downright fraudulent. And it's very difficult for science to stand up and argue with policymakers and present itself to society that science is something special and the processes of science lead to greater knowledge production, compared with beliefs, ideologies, etc., when actually science itself is not necessarily as honest as it should be. So we need to earn trust in science. Science doesn't by right have the trust of society. It has to earn that trust. That's about openness and transparency. We have to adopt open science methodologies and mechanisms. We have to play down the hype of science. We like to hype our discoveries. We like the hype helps us to get funding, etc. We need to reconsider that. All the studies that have been done on misconduct or sloppiness of science have indicated that training and mentoring is the key stage when scientists, if you like, can go wrong or go right. And we need to really look carefully at that stage of the scientific process. And then we need to get the incentives and the disincentives right around science. In terms of responding effectively to societal challenges, so coming back to the resilience agenda, we need to frame in terms of integrated socio-technological solutions. We work in disciplines. We tend to work now more and more in multidisciplinary environments. We talk about co-design and co-production, but in fact it's very difficult to do. We don't necessarily encourage it in our systems, our structures, our universities, our teaching don't necessarily promote that type of science, and that's what we need to do if we're really to address the SDGs and provide the scientific basis we need to take forward those agendas. We need to focus more on collaboration and competition. Of course, at a national level, one of the major reasons for supporting science is innovation and economic growth. And that's a very valid and important outcome of science. But that also can be contrary to the sort of collaboration and competition that we need across borders, across disciplines, etc. And so we need to work that out. And then we need greater global solidarity in practice rather than just in statements. We need to look at the mechanisms by which we support science so that it can really encourage and support global collaborations. A lot of this comes down to the way our science system is pulled by the way we measure it, the way we incentivize it. At the moment, we look at scientific excellence. I think we've heard the H index mentioned a couple of times. It's true that many excellent scientists have a high H index, but not all of them do. And much excellent science is done without being recorded, and helps our systems promote those who do fit with the indices that we use. And we need to think about how we can encourage good science that doesn't, at the moment, have high citations or appear in the high-impact journals. We need to reward teamwork and collaboration, not just first authors. Nobel Prizes are for individuals. We need to think about, do we need a Nobel Prize for teams? Do we need a Nobel Prize for new areas? Do we need to, if not a Nobel Prize, but the basic reward structure and prize-giving structures, we need to think about those. We need to incentivize openness and sharing. There was a lot of discussion about data this morning. We need a lot of people working on data, stewarding data. There's a lot of data there, but what we need is good quality assured data. That's a lot of work, a lot of effort, and the people who do that in the current academic structures, they don't fit. There's no career structure for those people, so we need to think about that. And then other things that have come up, public engagement, policy relevance, there have been sessions on those, but basically we need to incentivize those. They need to be rewarded when scientists come up for promotion or for career positions. We need to look at more than the bibliometric scores. We need to look at these other things as well.
Thank you. So, what a well-behaved panel. They all stuck to time. And we've covered quite a lot of ground already. So I'm going to try and pull out some of the issues that you talked about and use my privilege as chair to ask you each a question to get things going. And then we'll throw it out to the audience to chime in and give us some questions to carry on thinking about. Paolo, I liked your question about what future do we want? And I think that's something that all of the panelists have been asking. What future do we want? And you particularly asked, how can science feed into public policies? I wondered if you could just give me a couple of thoughts about how. I mean, I know that all of the panel, I think, are feeding into public policies already, but what do you think can be improved? Because it's clear we can all do better at this element.
Yeah, I would list one single thing that is absolutely necessary is better global governance, you know. So this is critically important. So we are living in a single planet divided in 196 individual countries, and the policies are defined on a country-by-country basis on a particular interest of economic groups here or there. You can see the examples of the United States recently. That is the only country of the whole planet that left alone the Paris Agreement. And it's an important country in terms of emissions. So basically what the United States does, it affects all of us, the 7 billion people. So how to structure a new governance system in a way to increase the resilience of the climate system. Try to keep policies that could be harmonized, let's say, between all countries with no exception. So I think this is a big challenge, but in my opinion, it's absolutely necessary if you want to stabilize the climate in a way that our sons and our descendants could live in a way that they can comfortably have a nice and friendly climate system.
Okay, thank you. And so moving on from that, I mean, I think one of the things that was nice in your slide deck, Professor Hiyashi, was that your slide about mitigation and preparedness, because on the left-hand side there was a column and it covered terrorism, pandemics, environmental problems. It covers a lot of issues. So it seems, I mean, I know these issues are not simple, but it seems like this is one way of working that can apply, I'm going to say across the board, but I will probably be challenged on that. How would you take that forward with your example of what you have done in Japan with regard to earthquake and tsunami risk? How would you take that forward to be used around the world for earthquakes and tsunamis and for other issues as well?
Actually, the meaning of the figure that I showed was that now we are having more and more different kinds of hazards. So every time we're going through like a very fundamental societal change, we do create the new types of hazard. And then so from like a hunter-gatherer society, agricultural society, industrialized society, and informational society, we'll keep creating new things. And then my point in that figure was every discipline had their own pet hazard. So they wanted to improve their predictional power and preventional power, and then they wanted to get more budget for their own hazard. But these things oftentimes end up with very hazard by hazard mitigation or the prevention. And then what we have been observing for the last 2 or 3 decades is such kind of hazard by hazard prediction and mitigation doesn't work well. And that's the reason we do need the resilience. We have to overcome the impact and try to be kind of stronger and more sustainable. And in order to do that, we should pay more attention, like a mechanism of response or the recovery. That's fortunately generic, so that we could take care of almost all kinds of response and recovery process in a very generic way. And so I think that that's kind of a all-hazard approach, not by hazard, and more generic. And then these 2 different orientations should be combined. That's a basic approach for the resilience. Then the second part of your question, earthquake and tsunami thing, unfortunately, we've been suffered a lot from that kind of a hazard. So we developed the expertise on that. So then we have no intention to monopolize that kind of expertise. And so we would like to have many people shared with understanding and then also the technology. And so our country, we learned a lot about 150 years ago from a Western world. That was a good pioneering model for in many sense of science and technology. And then we hope to be such kind of a pioneering model in at least the field of like earthquake and tsunami discipline. And so that's the reason today I just introduced that example. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's clear that, like you said, your slide can feed into all hazards, and that can be something that Paolo can take forward when he's setting up this global governance mechanism he's talked about. Virginia, you touched in your presentation on big data. And I think we all wring our hands a little bit about big data. It's talked about a lot, but I don't know, and I know we grapple with it a lot. What do you think is the key, what would be the key take home? I know you're doing some work on data going forward, and you touched on that. What would be your key take home about what do we need to do to deal with this data?
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's been a fascinating session with my panelists, co-panelists. To me, big data, as you ask, is something that is absolutely critical. The Sendai Framework, the SDGs, and increasingly the Climate Change Agreement will require data. It will require evidence to inform whether or not we are complying with what we've agreed to do. And these global targets are really critical for us to be able to deliver this. And the rules and the systems that we'll need to develop, which will require much more comprehensive scientific mechanisms, are really important. So one of the things that we've been doing with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network is not just considering that we need data from our national statistical offices, but there's a call now for an open data officer within each country, because the data is now complicated and not easy to access to answer a lot of the questions around the global targets. And if we're looking at the all hazards approach, which I so agree with Professor Hayashi, to us there is a real need for having a family of how we hold this data in a sensible, useful, usable, and used way. Let me take you slightly sideways. I'm a health professional. Did you know that the only system of early warning that exists across the world, which shares globally with all countries, sits inside the World Health Organization? They have the international health regulations, very much driven by the sudden acute respiratory syndrome illness that happened in the early 2000s that killed, unfortunately, many people, and a lot of them health professionals. They have been refined, reviewed, and countries are increasingly adopting them under the World Health Organization. But the trouble is with these is that they only talk to the ministries of health. They don't necessarily talk to the heads of state, which these voluntary agreements of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai Framework, and the Paris Agreements agree to. So I'm concerned that if we don't get our big data systems to work by having something possibly like a world cybersecurity organization, a world big data organization, we will struggle to be able to share the information between science, governments, industry, and most importantly, individuals who now hold so much of the data themselves. So we need a new system, we need a new model to try and answer so many of these things. And I think that will be very important. Why? Because one of our real concerns in the all hazards world is antimicrobial resistance. I am sure all of you have taken an antibiotic in your life, and your life has been extended because of it, and made well. But those antibiotics are very precious resources that we must not lose because we abuse them, and the bacteria learn how to beat us. So we need to have systems by which we can understand these and prevent the future disasters that we in the health domain, but also in the all hazards domain, are increasingly concerned about.
Thank you. So a question for you, Peter Thompson. Excuse me. You said your third point is that science is fundamental in helping to save the oceans, and I guess in all of our issues that we've talked about today. And I know from talking to you yesterday that you believe that science can't do it alone. How do we as scientists, or what do we need to do as scientists, who do we need to get involved in order to save the oceans, mitigate against climate disaster and the other hazards that we've talked about today? Who do you think that we need to get involved, and how do we do that?
Yeah, so science doesn't exist in a vacuum. You're part of the rest of us. You're human beings like the rest of us. You have kids like the rest of us. You suffer the same disease as the rest of us and all the rest. So I don't think, in making that comment that I see you as sort of aliens from another planet or something just because I'm not a scientist. It goes without saying that any initiative that is put forward, such as Sustainable Development Goals, that science has to be an integral part of it all the way through, not just the oceans SDG. Think of something like the education, SDG 4. Science and innovation, to me, that's the same bucket, right? So on something like education, why should we be perpetuating institutions and teaching methods that are basically the same as what I got back when I was a young man, when today we have the internet, where rather than having to go to Cambridge, as I had the luck of doing, you can sit in the back blocks of Fiji and download from the internet the same kind of information with the same kind of teaching and be just as good as the guy who got the scholarship to go off the other side of the world at Cambridge. I mean, that is the way the world has changed in my lifetime. Science and innovation can change everything we do. So in answer to Ruth's question, how does science engage? Well, it is engaged. It's part of us. It's part of humanity. In practical terms, something like the Ocean Action, I'm forming a high-level Friends of Ocean Action, and at least a quarter of the members of that will be scientists. Because obviously we can't take ocean action without having information about what the best science is in all these areas that I delineated earlier in terms of ocean problems. So, my, I guess, rather plain answer to the question is you are part of everything. You have to ensure that your voices are being heard and that you're getting the necessary resources, and only by getting involved will you get those. So that would be my rather inadequate answer to that question.
Thank you. I'm sure we can discuss that further. Final question from me, and then I promise you get your go as well. Carthage, you talked a lot about, I think your definition, what struck me in your definition of resilience for science was that the bit at the end which said we can come out stronger. And I like that, and I like to think, I know Peter sees a lot of things at the UN that make him depressed, but I would like to think that we can come out stronger. I particularly liked the aspects of your presentation where you talk about collaboration and changing the incentive system. But how can we, I mean, that incentive structure in science, publication and impact and narrative research articles, and you talked about other things. How can we change that structure when it is so ingrained?
So I think it's timely. I think the academic community itself recognizes that the current structure and the associated hyper-competitivity and pressure to publish are not actually leading to the science that we want, and a part, at least, of the cause of some of the malaise of science. Part of the challenge is that, quite rightly, the main output of science in the short term has been the scientific publications, and in a way, it's that new scientific knowledge that is supposed to be in those science publications, and that's what science is about, producing new scientific knowledge, and then afterwards innovations and other things. And that is still fundamentally what we need from science. But how? So there are multiple problems with the current publication system, and we've incentivized producing lots of publications, and if you get it in a high-impact journal, then that's it, you've won. As opposed to going back to, if you like, the established, Merton's norms of science, and being self-critical and only publishing when you've got the full story, and making sure that what you do publish has been fully tested and that you're sure of it. It's almost as though, I don't know, I heard a suggestion from a Nobel laureate who's associated with the human genome sequencing, who said, we should actually put a limit on the number of publications a scientist can produce per annum. Now, that's an interesting suggestion. Most of the scientists who I've tested it with have immediately responded, you can't do that. And then when they've thought about it, they've said, well, maybe there is something in that. So I think it's about the norms of science. It's about scientific behavior. We complain also about the publishers and their role and what they do. And of course, part of their business model is getting more publications. And so there's also that pressure on it. But they can very much be allies in this. They are very concerned at the quality of some of the stuff that is being published. So I think publications in some way, or scientific knowledge production, has to be one of the things that is measured and valued in science, and maybe the primary thing. But we need to look much more carefully at how we do that. And then there are obviously these other things, to do with team working, collaborations, science for policy actions, and public engagement. All of those things, you can imagine how they could be incentivized, both with funding and in terms of the way we measure them and the indicators we use.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I would go the other way and would say, don't limit the publications, but publish the stuff that you would otherwise just put in your file drawer and not see the light of day. But anyway, that's a whole other plenary, probably, at another conference. I've got a giant clock down here. It says we have 19 minutes. I think we started a little bit late. If the conversation is still going, we can run a little bit over, I think. But have we got questions down here? Are there mics? Do we need to shout? Okay, I'm going to start with Jacqueline in the front, next to the front row.
Thank you so much. Great panel. I'm going to direct my comments to Paolo and to Peter, the two Ps. And I'm going to use oceans as my question. So we talk about resilience as the title of this session, but actually resilience is not to be confused with adaptation. And resilience and recovery, and I'm looking specifically now at oceans, it's very likely with ocean acidification that we are going to lose a lot of the capacity, for example, of coral reefs. So I'm looking now at the scientific community and saying, well, who is it who's going to, so to speak, design the oceans of the future when ocean acidification has really taken hold and we don't have those coastal systems to rely on? And I hope that the answer is going to be much more kind of open-ended, but I think you're going to need some other kinds of engineers and scientists in your ocean action pack.
Well, Peter and Paul, as I said to them earlier, you know, we can probably start something good between the two of us, and here we go. Ocean acidification, I realized about 5 years ago, was probably my deepest nightmare. But let me say where I'm looking to for adaptation, what we can do. And believe me, there's a lot being done around the world as we speak, as you know, in that field. One of the things that I'm launching, as I mentioned, are these communities of ocean action. The communities of ocean action, which are being launched at the end of this month in global webinars from New York, are made up of derived from the 1,400 voluntary commitments which were made at the Ocean Conference. One of them is on coral. There's another one on ocean acidification. The people that made the voluntary commitments are the frontline actors in these two areas. They're academic institutes, they are oceanographic institutions, they are countries, they are cities, they're coastal communities. And we're trying to be as inclusive as possible because not only do we need solid science, but we need the people who are actually active in the field. So there are people out there, for example, planting new types of coral which are being shown to be resilient. We're starting to get evidence to that effect. We're finding, and declaration of interest, I'm on the board of trustees of the Woods Hole Institute. Woods Hole is finding that there are super reefs out there in the world, which for reasons not fully understood yet, are resilient, where the coral remains strong and healthy, in spite of the fact that the ocean acidification going on around it and the water temperatures around it are the same as reefs a little bit down the road, which are dying off. So the understanding of all that is still very much science in development. But my response to you is that don't lose hope on this. Yes, we are going to lose huge amounts of the coral reefs of the world. That's already been done. Those are gone. And that, for me, as somebody from a coral community, is obviously a tragic thing. It's like seeing a rainforest turn to a desert. But there is hope in terms of resilience and adaptation for coral. And Paolo, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would like just, Jackie, to add the issue of, in addition to ocean acidification, sea level rise will have a tremendous impact on coastal areas that would affect billions of people, you know. And of course, this is something that we still have to find a way of how to do that in developing countries, you know, how to protect the large city, coastal city, the coast of Bangladesh, you know, and small island, and so on and so on. So basically, we needed to build up resilience and cooperation on how to do with the sea level rise in addition to the sea acidification.
Thank you. There's a question in the front here. I think you've got two people running towards you with mics.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the presentations, and thanks a lot for the fact that this forum is addressing and highlighting issues of importance to humanity, which were never before highlighted, and disasters and hazards is one of them. Of course, there were issues mentioned in the presentations about the economic return versus the hazards, and how governments can't do enough in front of the business sharks, let's say, who are ruining the planet on one hand. And also the prevention was mentioned, and of course the more we have prevention, the better. Yani prevention is part of the big solution. But nevertheless, still we face a lot of hazards on one hand, not to mention the man-made disasters that we have to encounter. On the other hand, when we have disasters, definitely we need different approach. So hardly we manage the day-to-day life. And disasters, of course, need different minds, different means, because that's how you manage disasters. It's not emotions. And why are we very much behind in disaster management and in developing resilience? The more governments and institutions are prepared, and the more hazard and disaster management is part of the ongoing operation, it's the better. We hardly have drills, we hardly have young people understanding how to behave when things go abnormal and so on. It's enough. This is the question, and where can we start? Thank you.
Wow, okay. Virginia, where can we start?
What a wonderful commentary. Thank you. To me, one of the most important things is to know your hazards. Then you know what education, what drills, what planning, what preparedness you need. And the Sendai framework calls for national risk assessments. And what we do in the UK and in many other countries is to publish a national risk register. And this has focused our thinking inside the United Kingdom really clearly. It goes straight to our Prime Minister through our Cabinet Office, who own this process. It is signed off by her. It is a very public system that we have, and it's very clearly available in a very recent publication from UNISDR. We look at all the hazards. We look at the likelihood of these happening. We look at the impact they could have. We then plan who is going to be responsible for making sure that we have an understanding of what those risks are, that we have plans to address them, that these plans go to all levels, right down to the local communities, making sure that everybody understands what the risk and attaching to it, where relevant, early warning. So our early warning is best on weather-related events, but we're increasingly added air pollution, space weather, and other events that we can start to measure. What we know we're not good at the moment is being ready early for things like cyber attacks. And our National Health Service was caught out in June earlier this year by being hit by a malware event, and a lot of our hospitals had difficulty in working. So the most important thing is to look for all hazards and understand what the whole picture is, just as Professor Hayashi has been saying, but also sharing it publicly, openly, in an available way with all the communities so everybody understands what they need to do. For instance, do you have a personal family emergency disaster plan? Do you have a grab bag if you had to evacuate? Would you take your medicines with you? Would you take nappies for your babies? All these things that are so important that we need to pull together. We all need to be responsible, and we all need to be resilient. But your question has triggered many thoughts in my mind. And there's much we can do, all of us, whether we're scientists or community people. But as scientists, we can help governments, our professionals, to lead.
Thank you. And you wanted to add something?
Yeah. Actually, that the government or the government is a very important agent for disaster management. But I would say we shouldn't trust too much. They cannot be so powerful in that sense. When the Kobe earthquake happened, we did kind of long-term recovery study. And then what we repeatedly found was the importance of the public health provided by the government. That's the one ingredient, but only takes care of 10% of our entire help. The other two agents, very important, mutual help and self-help. The self-help, as a matter of fact, took care of 70%, and the mutual help remaining 20. So that even though the government getting well established in dealing with the disasters, I do believe that they are very wholeheartedly doing their best, but still they're not good enough. So that we do need a self-help and a mutual help. In order to these two types of help be effective, as Virginia mentioned, we should understand the hazard, we should understand what a disaster is, and then we should understand how we have coped with and overcome those disasters in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question down here, and then I'm going to move over to this gentleman in the front. So,
thank you very much. My name is Connie Shemreire. I'm from Uganda, and I'm here under the umbrella of the Global Young Academy. And my question goes to Paulo. You mentioned the necessity of more south-south bridges in science to innovate around building more resilience. But I wanted your thoughts on what the place of other knowledge systems, such as indigenous knowledge, are in this south-south bridge, especially in countering the promotion or the exploitation of unsustainable practices like consumerism. And I was especially struck earlier by some philosophical challenges to thinking about solving our problems technologically with the frame of mind of humans being having command over nature. So I just want your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
That's very tough to answer clearly. But, first, on scientific cooperation, to us, the Academy of Science of the Developing World is doing a fantastic job into put South-South scientists together. But it's not enough. For instance, in Brazil and probably many developing countries, it's much, much easier to get a scholarship to go to the United States or Europe instead of go to South Africa, India, or even China. So basically, this has to change. No question about, because our solutions are much closer to your neighbor country than to the developed world in general. There are exceptions, of course. So basically, we have to enhance these mechanisms of South-South cooperation. The BRICS initiative also are doing several call for proposals for cooperation between developing countries, and I think that is absolutely critical, But for the second part of our question is much more complex because it involves changes in behavior, changes in how we'll consume the natural resources of our planet, and this is very region dependent, and the solutions will be probably more local than global. And of course, you are still very, very early into find a way on how to optimize this issue.
I think this is more complex than incentivizing different things in science, maybe. But you're right. There's a question here.
I'm Najib Abu-Karaki, Professor of Seismology at the University of Jordan, seismologist. I wrote the question because the Right Honorable Lady touched a little bit of it, but it is written and I will read it, if you please. I like to see more emphasis on prevention against disasters. Manquakes are more important than earthquakes. What is resilience in the case of a nuclear holocaust, whether accidental or intentional? You may agree with me that every minute that passes brings humanity closer to this type of mega catastrophes. Don't you think that we should focus on working towards a better and more fair, more just world, better informed people as a mean of prevention, so that in this world, no deceptive monopoly of media is possible, which is sometimes a very important cause of wars. The Iraqi war and the Syrian war are examples of that.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to... I mean, I think this touches on some of this question about how do we change behaviour and how do we work towards a more fair world. Does anyone want to touch on that?
No other takers, so I'll have a go at that. Look, guessing which is the greatest hazard that we should be developing resilience against, whether it's nuclear war or antimicrobial resistance or climate change, or, hard for anybody to provide an answer to that one. Resilience to all those hazards is obviously what we're trying to do. My last comment to the room would be that, as the professor said, governments have a very important role to play, but self-help and mutual help is so important. And the more I see, the more I realize the value of individuals, of families, of communities, of towns and cities and states. All my experience shows me that that is more relevant, actually, than what governments do. So you as individuals, what are you doing? I often get young people pointing a finger at me and saying, the UN, what have you been doing for these last 50 years? Well, we've been doing a lot. But my response to them is, what are you doing? Because, I as a grandfather, my wife and I, a couple of years ago, decided to give up beef. We like beef, but we love our grandchildren more. So we could not justify continuing to eat beef. I have lived in cities now for the last couple of decades. So I've given up long ago owning a private car. Right? These are decisions which all of us can make, which are going to make this world sustainable. And we're going to have to start going vegetarian. We're going to have to be using shared transport and so on if we are going to cope with the mega trends of exploding population, exploding middle class, declining resources, etc. So I would put it to you as individuals. This is not just something for the United Nations or governments. It's for each of us as human beings to look out for the good of our families to come. And my final sentence would be to quote Gandhi when he said, there's enough on this planet for human needs, but there is not enough on this planet for human greed. Thank you.
Thank you. I did promise a question there, and I've got one at the front. Can you make them quick? And we'll be quite concise now because I've got a big counter down here that's stopped, which means we must be, we're stopping you from getting coffee. So be concise, please.
Hi, I'll be as concise as I can. My question to the panel is, I want to bring it back a bit to the issues of funding, or just the structural problems with science, and how we can avoid the politicization of funding. A conservative government comes into office and suddenly universities are out a whole bunch of money. And also the kind of social demonization of scientists that's becoming increasingly a problem. And also the devaluing of science in terms of the kind of salaries that certain scientists get and the available positions and these kind of detailed issues to do ultimately with money.
Thank you. And then this lady at the front, who's
Yes.
also going to be concise.
My question is to Paulo. He showed two graphs in which there is the CO2 emission from the north and the suffering from the south. Can you tell me why we are going to suffer from the sins of our brothers from the north?
Right, Paolo, you go first, and then if each of the other panelists, or maybe if Carthage takes that, and then the other three panelists can, or the other two panelists can sum up, because Peter already did. So, Paolo.
Yeah, the issue of equity, you know, the issue of common responsibility is a critical one in global climate change, you know. Of course, most of the developing countries, most of developed countries got their wealth they have today through emission of greenhouse gases. And of course, we in the developing world, we are not prepared to deal with all these issues. There are financial mechanisms that are being designed actually this week in Bonn, trying to get some kind of compensation or help, but so far they are being so small, so almost negligible actually, you know, and probably will continue to be like that over the next 5 to 10 years. So actually that is the reason why I focused so much on South-South collaboration. So we cannot depend on the North to do that. So we needed to build our own mechanisms to help ourselves to get out of these critical conditions.
Thank you. And then Carthage, do you want to take the question about governance in science and funding? And
so we don't have time to answer the question, and I'm not sure there is a really clear, definitive answer. It's absolutely right that politics and funding for science go through waves up and down. It's one of the reasons why the autonomy and academic freedom of science is really important, and why in many countries you have quasi-independent science agencies. So it's interesting, for example, if you look at the USA at the moment, the science system in many ways is thus far proving to be quite resilient. So even though you have a president who apparently is not a great fan of science, the system thus far is proving to be resilient because of the inbuilt independence and autonomy of those systems. The other issues, so social demonization, I think a lot of that really is that science has been sort of in its ivory tower, to use that old phrase, and now science really needs to explain much more how it works and how it operates. And as I emphasize, this issue of science itself has to keep its own house really in order if it is going to earn the trust that it believes it should have, and I believe it should have. And the same issue of devaluing science, I think it's related. I think also that there's a lot of concern of this predominant scientific model, which is, you know, science, you support science to support innovation, to support growth. And with little regard necessarily for the social implications of that. And all technologies have good and bad sides to them. And we have to recognize that as scientists. We can't just say we're neutral, what we do is neutral, and then it's up to market forces to decide. We have to engage more in those debates about what sort of society we would want and how technologies should be used in that society.
thank you. So then just brief sum up thoughts, please, from the final two speakers.
Okay. I think science and technology, in essence, is a very challenging thing, so that the scientists and engineers should have that in their heart.
Thank you.
And not to be kind of overwhelmed by the existing systems.
Thank you.
So can I conclude? Resilience in an interconnected world is absolutely key. Science is part of it. The Sendai framework, which I've had the privilege of sharing with you, calls for global platforms, global information systems to assist in implementation. Why don't we set up a what works system of what we know could work, but also saying what we know may not work? And we share this in a much wider way. The Sendai framework asks for it. Please, World Science Forum, help us to deliver it.
Thank you. So, gosh, what a lot of ground we've covered, and I'm sure we'll carry on this conversation over coffee outside. It's very clear to me that we have the approach and we have early warning for some hazards, but we can do much more. And to do this, I think we can think about what we could take forward in the declaration from this World Science Forum 2017. The salient points I've picked up are: we need global governance, we need open data, we need attention to response and recovery. The use of technology and teaching and science itself need to adapt to the world which has changed around us. And we need scientific knowledge production and measures need to change, and incentivization needs to change. We need to talk more broadly to policy and to public audiences, and we in this room need to go away and think about what we as individuals can do to make a difference ourselves. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the session is now concluded. Your next session will begin at 4:30 p.m. Thank you. السادة الكرام، انتهت الجلسة. ستبدأ الجلسة الجديدة في الساعة 4:30.